Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Welcome to the Not So Daily Show, the show that comes to you daily, except when it doesn't. I am your host, Themba Kevin. We've got a guest in studio today, clinical psychologist Gomezgani Jonazi. How are you doing, my brother?
I'm good. How you doing, man?
Very well. It's good to have you here. Obviously, it's been a tough week, you know, as a country, following the shocking and timely passing of one of our greatest superstars, to come out of our country. So I wanted you to come here and help me unpack a few things around like mental health and all of that. So, thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me, actually. I think it's a topic of interest for me personally because I think a lot of the times it's something that's pushed to the background, so it's a conversation I'm really happy to have. And hopefully we can unpack it in a way that's good enough for everyone today. Naturally, we might not be able to touch on everything.
100%.
But we can get the conversation started.
100%, totally agree. Well, before we get the conversation started, I was inspired to write a little rap for Riky, just in honor of his memory. So okay, let's do it like this. You were a legend before you opened the barber shop. I can't imagine you 6 feet under because you belonged on top. You put yourself second and always the cotton first. You put so many people on, who knows what you would have done next. Good people struggling makes you realize that life is not fair. We all wish you could have just hung in there instead of hung up there. But you said it yourself, this land is still your home. But now that you're gone, we all feel home alone.
Bengisitshela ukuthi uthande benginalaluwa nelishi. Bengisitshela ukuthi uthande benginalaluwa nelishi. Sondela my baby inhliziyo, you're my baby ngiyakudinga my baby. Sondela my baby ngiyakudinga my baby inhliziyo, you're my baby.
So I've been watching too much Genius, but
I was actually pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, bro. I feel like the impact that this man made. It's just so difficult to understand in the moment. But when you watch like the outpouring of like just sorrow and all the goodbyes on social media, you kind of realize not just how touched people were, but how shocked people were. And when I look at the shock, I can't help but feel it's because of how happy he looked. Yeah. I don't know if that's a sentiment that you share.
Firstly, I think I should just put this out there. I was actually pleasantly surprised with the hip hop. Because there's always like a little bit of concern whenever someone's like, I wrote a rap, and it's like, oh, what's about to happen here?
I know the feeling.
That was actually pretty good. Like, you wrote something there. I liked the lines on it. That was pretty good.
Shout out.
But, I think whenever we're looking at loss, especially very sudden loss, it's something that can take some time to process, whereas if the person was ill or they were, the struggle was so evident, it's easy to sort of, make sense of it in your head and say, this happened because of this. So whenever we are only looking at someone through social media or just the media as a whole, we tend to forget that we're looking at highlights in their lives. So they can look really happy, but we don't really understand the picture of what's happening for them. What's 100%. Their day-to-day lived experience? What are they coping with? What challenges 100%. Are they facing, and how exactly are those challenges affecting them? So it can be a bit of a culture shock where it's like they looked so happy. What happened?
And I think that's actually what the world is going through now. And I think even like myself, not having like had a personal relationship with him, it's just gonna take like a bit of a while to sort of reconcile those two ideas. But the reason I wanted to talk to you specifically as a man and a psychologist is because I wanted to understand to get like a twofold response in terms of like how men, like Riky being a man, and having like, when you listen to his music, having rapped like so much about the pressures of life, in one of the songs he released just before his passing, he says that his mom told him, if you stop, we all fall down. If you stop, we all suffer. So I wanted to get a response from you as a man, like dealing with those pressures, and also like just as a professional. But before we go into all of that, I want to just also like get an idea of who you are, you know,
Yeah.
understand? So yesterday we went on a call and
We did,
I
we
got a
did.
bit of a feeling around you. But the first question I asked you is like, how did you get into the field of psychology? Because as we know, like most men only even learn about psychology after school and like later in their lives when
Yeah.
adulting happens. How did you get into psychology to end up studying psychology in undergrad?
Well, I think, and we talked about this last night, where I was like, I gave you a little bit of the Cliff Notes version, where it's like, all right, here's a summary of everything that happened. But my journey into psychology was wasn't like a quick decision. Growing up, I always thought I'd be doing something related to computers, you know, because the spaces that I grew up in, those are the careers that were accepted and valued and recognized in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So you say, I want to do psychology. It's like, you want to do what?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, even today, my mom describes what I do as, oh, he's a head doctor. I'm like, Mom, I'm not a doctor. You know, so I chose psychology because there were several events in my life that sort of impacted me pretty hard, and therapy was something that helped me through it. So, you know, growing up, I was always really described as very effeminate, where it would always be like, yo, the way you do things, you know, it's not typically what you'd expect of, you know, of a man. Like I gesticulate, I use my hands, I can be a little feisty apparently when I speak. You know, so people were like, yo, those gestures, like it was a little suspicious, you know, it was a little sus. So I became very anxious as a child because I was always worried about, you know, when I present myself in the space, am I going to be accepted? Am I going to be validated? Am I going to be recognized as, you know, yeah, you should be here. We're cool with you. You know what I mean? So I was always thinking about how am I coming across? How am I coming across? And that made me a very anxious person. And that anxiety really got bad when I was about a teenager because some other things started happening in my life. I was about 13 years old when I started realizing my dad had a substance abuse issue, you know, with alcohol. And yeah, like there was just so much turmoil in my life and I really wasn't coping too well. So by 17, that anxiety was pretty bad. I also was pretty depressed at the time. I was not coping well at all. And my decision to go into psychology was like, yo, I actually really want to understand what's happening to me. You know? And as I started studying and studying and studying, it started making more sense, but not quite. So after I studied, I did this course where I could become a counselor after graduation. So while I started counseling, one of my supervisors noticed that, you know, I wasn't developing so quickly. And a big part of that for her was, you know what, maybe it has to do with personal stuff. Like he's got some personal baggage that's holding him back from actually really, you know, interacting in the space authentically and stuff like that. So she recommended therapy. I see. And therapy like really helped me over a course of about 3 to 6 months. And I saw some significant changes. Like I used to be so anxious I couldn't even speak.
So like you actually like looking at yourself before and after therapy, you could actually like recognize.
Bro, it was massive. That's why I was like, I would go into a crowd, right? And people would be like, speak. And I would literally feel my world just shrinking. I couldn't even see properly. I would shake. I would speak, but you couldn't hear me. Whether you're like right there, you can't hear anything I'm saying. So my ability to function in social spaces was gone. You know what I mean? And with therapy, that started easing. And you know, started unpacking a lot of that and realizing what happened. So when I got better, I got to thinking, was like, why didn't I go to therapy earlier? Because this was maybe 8 years after I first noticed I was an anxious kid. You know, so it's like, what stopped me from seeking therapy? And it was like the spaces that I grew up in. Because I'm from Malawi, so their therapy, at least at the time, it's better now. But it wasn't something that we look at.
Which is a similar case in South Africa. I feel like we're a bit more advanced because, you know, we like to follow trends and therapy's become like a trend. You know? But I feel like because it's become like such a trend, a lot of people just jump into it without understanding it. So like when people talk about like the Riky incident specifically, they talk about how like he was so self-aware of like his struggles and like he spoke about like his depression and stuff. But I feel like there's still a misunderstanding in terms of like what the range of mental illness is. You know, like you mentioned therapy, you know, there's also like like we spoke yesterday about psychiatry, also about like different types of therapy. So like when you go to work every day, what is it that you actually do? Like, do you guys, is it like a one size fits all solution? Like it's just, I'll counsel you, I'll tell you what's wrong with you, then when you leave here, you'll be good? Or is it like a process that once you are in there, like is it like a chronic illness? You know, like what exactly are the interventions of like, when you seek help, what interventions can you get?
It's sort of a process that you have to analyze as a clinician. Yeah. Because the person's going to come to you and they're going to say, you know what, this is what's happening in my life. And as you're consulting with them and you're getting that information, we put together a symptom profile, you know. So they're saying perhaps, let's say they're not functioning so well at school or at work, or their relationships are suffering. They have very low mood. Their sleep is not as it used to be, very poor quality of sleep. Sometimes they're not even sleeping at all. You know, those are just some of the symptoms you might see. With more, should I say, severe illnesses, sometimes you might even see perceptual disturbances where they're perhaps seeing or hearing things that aren't there, which we call visual auditory hallucinations, you know, stuff like that. So those become the symptoms, like this is what we're seeing. And then from there we will then diagnose and say, from the symptom profile, this is what I think you have. Because you know, there's a diagnostic manual that we use. We can't just say you have depression because a gut feeling is telling me this.
Which is
depression.
what we all think. Like we go through like a bad spell, go through a breakup, and we think, damn, that's depression. You know, that's this. But like what you're saying is that it actually has to fall into certain categories to be classified as. And depending on like the severity, like the treatment is different. So the different treatment options are like, you could see a clinical psychologist. Or like you could actually, and you could talk it out.
Talk therapy is one of our approaches, where we then say, you know what, let's try counseling and see how it helps. But sometimes there's a strong severity to the symptoms, and they're really impacting your functioning in several domains, whether it's at work or at school or at home, in your relationships, and those things have an impact. So there might be times where we think perhaps it might be helpful if they're medicated. That's when we refer to a psychiatrist.
I see.
Right? Because psychiatrists are doctors.
I see.
Right, so they went through the 6 years of medical school, and then afterwards, when they're registered doctors, they specialized in psychiatry. So they can actually prescribe medication if needed. We cannot as psychologists, because we never went to medical school. We're not doctors. So we'll refer to a psychiatrist, and if they agree, or in their own assessment, they say, you know what, this does need to be medicated, then that's something we'll do. There are other illnesses that, regardless of the severity, they need to be medicated because they have a very strong medical cause. So it's right?
Like chemicals in your head, or like
sort of, because mental illness is often an illness of the mind. And sometimes because we don't see it, we're not really, we don't understand what's happening in the person's mind. You know, their neurochemicals aren't perhaps functioning the way they should. There's an imbalance in how they're being produced. Maybe not enough of that neurochemical is being produced, or maybe too much. And because of that imbalance, medication helps sort of regulate that. Right? So that's why I was saying with some illnesses, it has to be medicated. One of the most popular that must be treated is bipolar mood disorder. Right? That one must be medicated.
But you know, like a question I have, where I always ask myself is that the psychology space. So like I went to see a psychologist for the first time late 2019. It was couples therapy. And as we were looking and we had to like choose a psychologist, I realized that there's a lot of females in there, you know. And I always wonder, like, how is it that there's so many females in the industry? Like, it's a female-dominated industry, but the societal ills are clearly male-dominated. Like, when you look at crime, rape, fraud, you look at all those things, it's clearly like male-dominated. And why do you think there's such a disparity? Because, like, I can say, like, as a man, there are some problems I have that I'm like, a woman won't understand.
You'd rather talk about it with another man.
Exactly. Like, or I feel like as a dude, you know.
No, I think you're right, because I've also come across something like that, where there's some men who say, no, I went to therapy but I had a female therapist, and I just didn't know how to bring up that perhaps I'm having an issue with my sexual functioning. So how do I bring up an erectile dysfunction? And the doctor told me it's likely psychological because there's nothing medically wrong. And I'm sitting in front of this woman. It's like, no, I'm not about to say that. Exactly. So there is actually one of these popular psychologists, I forgot her name, but she's often speaking on the feminization of psychology, where she says there's just so many women in this field. And there are a lot of reasons. Truth is, it's hard to pinpoint down to like 1 or 2 points where it's like, this is why. But a lot of people, and I think I agree with this, look at it in terms of what are the areas of interest for most people. Yeah. So whenever you're talking to men or women, you find that most times more women have an interest in people, in the in the occupations that they choose. Yeah. There's a stronger interest in people for women than in men. Whereas there are a lot of men who tend to prefer, they have interest in things. Yeah. I want to go into engineering, I want to go into medicine, I want to work with cars. And some of those interests kind of play a factor into the occupation that you choose. Yeah. Right. 100%. So it's about getting men more interested in interpersonal relations, because I think that plays a significant role in getting men interested in therapy. Because a lot of men tend to think therapy is just talking. It's like, I don't see myself being in a profession where I'm just talking to people, exactly. About their problems all day. It's like, it's not a strong career choice for me. More men might then say, I want medicine, and then perhaps they'll be a psychiatrist. So you might find there are more male psychiatrists
as they learn and they realize what it is.
Yeah.
Then, like, speaking specifically of suicide, right? When is there actually a classification of somebody is now suicidal instead of just depressed? Is there a line that somebody crosses, or once you attempt to commit suicide once, you are now suicidal for the rest of your life?
Well, suicide is a touchy topic because there isn't like a lot of agreement in how to categorize it. But once we start talking about suicide, we're looking at a desire or an attempt to take your own life. Right? So that's where suicide as a category comes in. We also tend to differentiate between a suicide attempt and perhaps deliberate self-harm, where you harm yourself, but there was no intent to die.
I see.
That is not considered a suicide attempt. But perhaps if you do harm yourself with an intent to die and it was spontaneous, that is still a suicide attempt, but it's seen as one that wasn't pre-planned.
I see.
So suicide we look at as a continuum. It's not just one thing, there's a continuum of it. So it starts with suicidal ideations, which is perhaps thoughts of dying, which can either be passive or active. So it could be passive in terms of I wish to die, maybe life wasn't better if I wasn't around. So it's a passive thought, whereas active is like I actively want to die, and then that sort of transitions into this is how I'm going to do it. So you start planning, So whether you want to go for an attempt that is perhaps more painful or less painful, you start thinking about how do I want to do this? I want to die now. How am I going to do this? So we start looking at that as active suicidal ideation, like these are active thoughts, you might act on it. And then from there we start looking at, do you have a plan? How are you going to do it? Is your plan fatal? Are you doing something that has a high likelihood of ending fatally, or is it something that you might survive?
I see.
So 100%. That's where we look at the severity of the plan. And then from there, have you actively attempted before? Or has it always sort of just ended at a plan, but you've never acted? So we separate it into those categories, and then that sort of helps us assess for risk. What is the risk here that you are actively going to commit suicide or complete suicide?
I see.
So there's mild, moderate, severe. There's different ways in which we look at it. If it's a mild risk, perhaps it could just be passive suicidal thoughts. Yeah. And I should say, no matter where you are on the continuum, it's highly advised that there is an intervention. Yeah. That you do seek help.
Yeah. And speaking of interventions, so like this past week, obviously after Ricky's passing, there were like videos floating around and interviews where you seem to say goodbye before, and these are interviews that are like, I think like a few months ago, where like in an interview saying, if you never see me again, you'll be on stage saying, if you never see me again, and then once like a person, I think that's the stage where you can see somebody is actively planning it, you know.
Yeah.
In one song, the song starts with I think 1,000,000 ways to die, choose one. So you see those kind of trends afterwards, but while that is happening, what power do like those around you have, you know, in terms of when you speak of interventions? Does like a friend, a family member actually have the resources or the know-how to actually help? Because, you know, like after people pass, a lot of people are left with guilt.
Yeah.
And they feel like, yo, what could we have done? And then that sometimes throws them into a depression. So in terms of interventions, what are the interventions that exist, so to say?
What can you do?
What can you do?
I think that's also one of those things that gets a little tricky in terms of what can you do, because in a sense there are options, but it gets harder the more you're not sure how to interact with the person. So there's sort of, in a sense, you do need to get the person that is actively suicidal at that time to sort of collaborate with you on, you know, appropriate ways to help them. So one of the first things you can often do is talk to the person. And sometimes that can be very difficult, you know, establishing that relationship where someone's open enough to say, you know what, this is something that I'm coping with and I need help. Other times they really want to keep that to themselves because they're worried precisely of what you talked about just now. It's like, if I bring this out there, it's going to hurt the people that I care about.
100%.
Right? Because they're going to feel so guilty and they're going to be worrying more about, is it their fault? And I don't want to put them through that. So I'd rather carry this by myself.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a burden to them. So the first step is try to get the person in your life, if you are concerned about their well-being, to actively seek help.
Yeah.
Because that's where you get the highest chance of success.
Yeah.
You could always try to get them to seek therapy, perhaps either in public hospitals or with a private therapist. I know with private therapists, it can be quite expensive for some.
Yeah.
So it becomes a lot more affordable at public hospitals. And I should mention that there are a lot of hospitals that do have psychiatrists and psychologists on staff that you can go to.
Yeah.
So most times if you're worried about the person in your life and you're not sure what can be done, take them to the nearest ER. In the hospital in your area, and just tell them there is a concern that this individual is suicidal and we consider it to be high risk. We're concerned that there will be imminent action towards those thoughts, or they've already acted in the past. What happens then is they call the psychiatrist down to the ER to consult with the person, and depending on their assessment, they might decide to immediately have them admitted to the hospital to seek treatment, or they might refer for therapy in what we call outpatient. So you're still at home, but let's say you then go to the clinic for treatment and then you leave again. You're not inpatient in the hospital.
I see.
So that's an option that can happen. If there is immediate concern for this person's safety, like once they leave, we're not sure that they're going to act on it or not immediately or even very soon afterwards. What happens sometimes is that there is what we call an involuntary admission. So the person is deemed a risk to their own safety.
I see. And then they put in like a controlled environment for a specific amount of time while they're monitored. That makes a lot of sense. But one thing I wanted to touch on is something that we spoke about yesterday, and it applies specifically to men. When you look at like a situation like the Riky situation specifically, when you've built so much social capital, you know, and you actually said something about Will Smith yesterday, you said like when you've built so much social capital and you see how the world treats people that seek help or that speak out, then like what is left to do, you know, like because you know we keep saying, you know, just talk, it's not so harmful, but we've actually seen as a society that it's like very harmful. So in terms of like the profession, is like social media standards and pressures, are they recognized? Because obviously that didn't exist when the psychology textbooks were written, so it's not there. So how is it like recognized in this day and age? Because it's a very big contributory factor.
I think this is a conversation that's become like really relevant recently. A lot of people are having it, and that's because of new conversations around toxic masculinity and, you know, what makes masculinity toxic. What factors have they identified where they say, no, the way men are men is bad. It causes harm in society. You know? So I think, personally for me, it really comes down to what is the function of masculinity. In any context that you go into, what is the function? right? Because there is the, oh, look, you're a man,
Yeah.
right? There's the fact that you're a male. But because you're male, how are you expected to present in society? What are you expected to do in society? And I think that contributes a lot to what we see. Because for a man, there's certain roles you have to perform in order to be recognized and validated as a man.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And if you don't do it, you are immediately, should I say, deplatformed. They take away your platform. You no longer have social capital. The moment your masculinity has been called into question and challenged, it is hard to reclaim it. And the reason why I brought Will Smith up is because, you know, we're looking at vulnerability and what happens when you express vulnerability as a man. Whereas, you know, he came forward and he admitted, like, no, my wife had an extramarital affair.
Yeah.
And he was like, no, I had it too. I also had other partners. You guys just don't know about her.
Yeah.
But, you know, because she had a partner, suddenly it was like, oh, he wasn't man enough. He couldn't keep his partner in check. He couldn't keep her satisfied. And because of that, it was like, he wasn't man enough. He was embarrassed. And his manhood was immediately brought into question. So I think that really contributes to, you know, that fragility of masculinity. It's this thing that is so sensitive. It is so easy to lose.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's why a lot of us, myself included, we protect our masculinity with our lives. Right. We are so careful with how we present ourselves in society because we are worried that other men or women are then going to say, what kind of man are you? Like,
100%.
how are you behaving this way? You know, why are you talking like that? Why are you dressing like that? Why are you behaving this way? That's not what men do. What kind of man are you? You know, like, are you protecting? Are you providing? Are you keeping us safe? Are you taking care of us? Yeah. And it even comes into question when a man is vulnerable, where it's like, sure. And I think a lot of men experience this, where they're like, you know what? I was vulnerable with my partner, right? And I cried in front of her, and she supported me. And then on the other hand, it'd be like, but only the first time I cried. The second time I cried, it was like, why are you still crying, my man? And the third time I cried, it's like, hi, guys, my man is always crying. What's going on? And then the fourth or fifth time, she's like, why is he still crying? Why isn't he like, you know? So it starts going into question where men are like, the more vulnerable I am, or the more often I'm vulnerable, it's then like my ability to fulfill my role as a man, to protect and provide is immediately questioned. So I can't afford to express that vulnerability. Because the moment I do, I lose all privileges of being a man. 100%. Because the moment you're in a space and you're not treated like a man, it's so devaluing.
Exactly.
You know, you sit there, you feel so small.
Yeah,
so
exactly. You know, it's like, yeah, you do feel like you're in a room, but you're not heard. You're not.
It's like you're no longer valuable. It's like we need men, but not this man. And I see this a lot on social media, especially with this Umlando challenge that's been going around. Yeah. You know, men are like shirtless and they're shaking their hips. Yes. And then there are a lot of comments always going around like, hi guys, men need to go back to war. Like, what are we seeing? What is this? And I'm like, sure, like these are some of the problems that we have, where it's like the moment you see men moving out of that mode of this is how men behave, there's immediately a question like, yo, we need to go back because we did something wrong. Yeah. So 100%. This vulnerable male we're asking for, we're like, it's important, we need it for male mental health, men need to express their vulnerabilities, but the moment we do, our vulnerability is weaponized against us. Yeah. It's like, you can't be vulnerable and be a man and keep that social capital. 100%. So it's like, choose one. Yeah. And I won't lie, I know a lot of men who's like, I would rather choose my social capital. Exactly. Vulnerability, I'm gonna keep it in check. I'm gonna keep it 100, I'll be good. Yeah. You know?
Which is, yeah, dude, it's scary. One last thing I wanted to also touch on is, you know, like how we say in our like societies, like therapy and like mental illness is stigmatized, and like yesterday you were schooling me on how like sort of like our history with psychology, especially as a country, is not really that great, you know.
It's not. It's really not. I think any industry at some point needs to, should I say, justify its presence in society, right? Why is this industry needed? Yeah. And we see it not just with psychology. For example, I think even computers or filmmaking had to justify its presence in society. People are like, we don't really need this. It's a luxury sort of thing, right? So with psychology, there's this poor history because way back when, especially for black people,
Yeah.
psychology is something that was used against them,
Yeah.
right? Like, I was speaking with a colleague not too long ago, and we were talking about the history of, you know, psychological testing in the country,
Yeah.
where it's like back during the apartheid days, you know, like when people were talking about, oh, we should separate the schools between black schools and white
Yeah.
schools. Some of the justifications used were that black kids aren't as smart as white kids, or black people aren't as smart as white people.
Yeah.
Therefore, white people should be in these schools with this tougher curriculum, and we should limit the
Yeah.
black curriculum because they don't have the mental capacity. And psychological testing and IQ tests were used to justify it. It was like, look at the results.
Yeah, exactly.
Clearly, some are performing better.
Exactly.
But, you know, in those results, context wasn't, you know, it wasn't added. There was no nuance where it was like, you know, naturally, anyone who grew up in a space with more resources will perform better. Because they've been allowed more opportunities to develop and be exposed and learn certain things.
Exactly.
So it's better.
Which is why I feel like, you know, as the black man, the reason like specific attention should be put on him is because that is exactly the person who's been given the least resources, but that has the most amount of expectation, you know, in society. And we've seen, like as I mentioned, with the crime and the things that happen, that how detrimental that is, because like we've been out of like apartheid for like
26
almost,
years?
yeah, like 27 years.
27 years, yes.
28 years this year.
Yeah.
And if you look at anything great in the world, nothing happens that quickly, you know, but suddenly, you know, like everybody wants to be on the level of like rich billionaires all across the world. And like it doesn't help that like also like our women sometimes have those expectations of like, but you're a man, why aren't you making this much and this much and this much? And you know, just like throws us into just like a never-ending cycle of I have to make money and be like this by any means. And we never look at like, yo, it's a new age. Women and men have similar opportunities, and sometimes, you know, to make up for it, women have better opportunities. So why can't we accept that we actually have like the same potential to make money, or we have the same potential to do this and this, and like just be kinder, you know? Because if that doesn't happen, you know, and you look at like the lens of society, which is social media now, it's just like impossible to find your space as a man because you have more to offer than just money and security, you know. There's so much more.
I think yet again, that's a conversation that I think needs like a lot of nuance, right?
True.
Because like, I always say personally, I think we need to be able to differentiate, right, between an individual issue and a social issue. So what I mean by that is when we say it's an individual issue, is it that this person is struggling or experiencing difficulty because there are issues specific to them, they're struggling but everyone else is okay,
I see.
right? Or is it a social issue where we're seeing in this community of people, all the men are struggling, or everyone, men and women and children are struggling? What's happening, right? So a lot of the issues with black men, where you're mentioning things like crime, etc., those are, from my understanding, even male mental health. These are social issues, because there are social factors contributing to those difficulties.
100%.
You know, the high crime rate is, I think, directly linked to low employment opportunities, which 100%. Is then because of the disparity between, you know, access to education. What is the quality of your education? Are you able to afford tertiary education, which increases your likelihood of gaining employment? And then you find a lot of people who've not been allowed access to education, struggling now. They're like, I need to survive. So it's either I'm going to sit here and, you know, go to the streets, or I'm going to enter a life of crime because I need to provide either for me or for my dependents, whether it's my kids, my brothers, my sister, my mother. I need to do something. You know. So then they go in, and some choose a life of crime because it's the only choice accessible to them. You know, so it's a social problem. To fix that issue, we need to address this other one of the inequality of. And South Africa is actually the most unequal society in the world, according to the UN. There
was the stats after the budget speech say 46% of our country relies on government assistance. So imagine 46% of your country can't survive without government financing every month. How is like 54% of the country, which don't even have like great jobs, going to finance that many people?
It's difficult.
And then when you look at it, you look at the stats, it's like it's black people, there's people like this, but you don't look at the stats of like but where's the finance? Where's the good education?
Where is
this
it?
where it's
Right?
at?
I think I saw this crazy stat, which I'd have to find the citation. I can maybe give it to you later, which says that the richest 10% in the country hold 60% of the wealth.
Yeah, I've seen that as well.
Right.
It's ridiculous, ridiculous.
And the poorest 60% hold maybe 10% of the wealth, which is
how do you run
majority
a
black
country
people.
like that? But before I let you go, bro, I wanted to discuss something because like now with the war between Russia and Ukraine, a lot of people like in the country are making memes,
World War III.
World War III memes and all of that. Actually, someone explained because I always like people don't really understand what it means.
Yeah.
But I saw like a great explanation this morning. So it's like this. So it's like Russia. It's like Ukraine used to belong to Russia, right? And then Russia was acting a bit funny, so Ukraine left Russia, right? And then Ukraine was trying to hook up with this new dude, which is NATO, right? And then Russia was like, nah, I'm gonna get Ukraine back, which is completely Kanye, Kim, and Pete Davidson, right? So,
I think I saw that meme. I saw that meme. I saw
if you
that
understand the war, that's the basic explanation. But like, is it really like as jokey as it is, or like do countries like South Africa actually like stand to lose a lot? Our Naledi Pando was like, yo, Russia, y'all need to stay back, and a lot of memes are coming out with that.
With
people
South
saying,
Africa.
yeah, people saying which nukes are you gonna send? Which bomb are you gonna send?
Yeah.
So yeah, is it like really psychologically a cause for worry? Because like now we've recently like seen petrol go above 20 rand.
Yeah.
And someone said it might even go to like 30 rand if
might.
like so like,
That's actually pretty true. Those concerns are valid because we live in a more globalized world, right? And the truth is, Russia is one of the biggest global exporters of oil.
yeah.
So if they're heavily sanctioned, that might impact the global distribution. Now, I'm not too sure if it's only going to impact European countries or if it's going to impact some African nations as well. But there's a chance that if it impacts European nations, it then impacts African nations because we have a relationship with those European nations. So if whenever resources are scarce, people tend to hoard them for themselves.
Yeah.
So there might not be, we're not trying to export to other African nations like that because we don't have enough for ourselves. So there might be an impact where we start seeing less oil just circulating in the economy and then oil prices go up. So I think that's the global concern because it's like whatever is happening in that war, the more countries get involved, the more access to other resources might become a problem if Russia continues to be as heavily sanctioned as they are now. There's a possibility, it's not certain. This is currently just thoughts going around, like this is how it might be affected, but it's definitely a possibility. But I also think in terms of the memes going around, I know people always tend to go at someone when they're using humor to cope with situations. But personally, I understand why humor has become a coping mechanism because when you're faced with this reality of, this event that's so concerning and so overwhelming, and you have nothing else, no access to other resources to do, what else can you use but humor?
100%.
It becomes funny. So you're like, all right, we can do nothing else, we're gonna meme it. And if anything, South Africa has shown in history that if they're gonna use anything, they're gonna use humor.
Yeah, but I completely agree, bro. Like sometimes all you can do is laugh about it.
Yeah.
And if there was a war on memes and stuff, would probably be right up there.
Yeah, I think humor is actually a really healthy coping mechanism. It can be a very annoying coping mechanism for people because they're like, this is serious, take it seriously.
Yeah.
But it's like, humor is helping me cope with
especially
this.
when you can't really affect the situation much.
Yeah, like if all I can do is laugh about it, at least let me enjoy that. And I think, you often hear this joke where people say the funniest people are often the ones coping with the most difficulty.
100%.
Because there is that relationship between humor as a coping mechanism and tragedy or coping with difficult experiences.
100%. And I think that's testament to our show because even through the memes, I mean, there was actually something I saw, this guy was like, the people that get their news from CNN are fighting the people that get their news from Fox News, and I'm just here getting my news from memes. And there's actually a lot of news that comes out in the memes, and our show is like testament to that because we use like humor and satire to get like news across.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, bro. In closing, thank you so much for joining us. And we spoke about the need for representation in the field. We need more of our people to go into these practices and help more of our people, and we also need more men to go in and help more men. So
Yes.
for like somebody who might be watching this and be like, yo, I actually like didn't realize like psychology. I didn't think of psychology as a career option. How do you actually like get to becoming a psychologist?
Yeah. Well, naturally depends on wherever you are in the world. But I can speak on what's needed in South Africa and Namibia, because those are the places I have exposure to. I believe actually most African nations. So in most places that you are, what's required to become a clinical psychologist is that you have up to a master's level training. So you have to do your undergrad, usually in Bachelor of the Arts. And then you have psychology as one of your options. And then, in your undergrad.
Oh, I see.
So psychology has to be one of your majors.
I see.
And then after that, you can apply for an honors in psychology.
I see.
And then from the honors, you then apply to become for a master's program.
Dang.
Wherever in the country. So I should mention that selection into these programs can be quite intense. I believe honors tends to only accept up to 10% of candidates that apply.
Are you serious?
I'm being very serious. And masters is even smaller, where they tend to accept up to 1 to 6%, because master's classes tend to be very small. In undergrad, you find the classes maybe 200, maybe even 300, depending on how big the university is. At honors level, most classes are 50 to 80, depending on the university. At master's level, most are six students. We were 7. I did my master's at the University of Johannesburg, and we were a class of 7. The largest class I know of is at WITS, where they accept up to 12 candidates for each category. So it can be very competitive, but I think it can also be a very rewarding career, once you're in. But I like to just let people know that, getting to that stage is quite difficult. Anyone interested in pursuing psychology, if you're still studying, I recommend finding resources online that will help you, learn more about the field and demystify. Because right now it's this mysterious thing. It's like, oh, psychology, but how do I get there? A place with a great initiative. I think I know two avenues online, social media. There is a YouTube channel as well. Unalome Wellness and Co. I think I worked with her earlier. Her name is Lauren. She has a channel where she speaks of her journey getting into psychology. She's also pretty cool. She lets people know, what happened, what's needed. She gives tips as well. And there is another avenue on Instagram called Cognition and Co.
I see.
So they also give a lot of information how to enter the field and give tips as well. They hold seminars and how they can help you get in. So those are avenues you can use. There are other parts of the world where you can't practice with your master's. You need a PhD. So that's like, I believe North America, so the United States, Canada, and Europe. You need a PhD to practice clinical psychology.
And how far are you in your journey?
I'm currently, I just completed my master's degree in clinical psychology. Now an intern. So usually what happens is you do the theoretical part. So you go to you start masters, you start doing the school training, learning the theory. They start teaching you how to practice. So we have practicals. And then afterwards, there needs to be a sort of test to see how well you perform in the field and not just in an exam or in a controlled setting of practicals. So then you do a 12-month internship at a hospital. So currently that's what I'm doing. I'm about 6 months into my internship. I'm scheduled to finish that in August, at which point you then have to sit for the board exam with the Health Professionals Council of South Africa to become registered as a clinical psychologist. And then you have to complete 1-year community service yet again at a hospital in the country. And only then, once you completed your community service, can you practice as a clinical psychologist in South Africa. So I'm an intern, which means I'm still working under supervision. So everything I do is supervised by a registered clinical psychologist. Or I'm at a hospital, so it's by a team of an entire psychology department.
Yeah, I feel like I misled the people. I mean, say if you've got 10 years to spare.
It's not, it takes about
it's really
6 years.
6 years. Yeah,
6 years if you go straight. Some people might experience delays, for example, getting into the honors program might take more than one attempt, or getting into the master's program might take more than one attempt. But
that's about the normal time it takes to complete a VITS 3-year degree, so it's not so bad. It's not so bad, but dude, thank you so much for coming through, Gomez. Really appreciate it. and hope to see more of you on the show. You know, as we
Yeah.
continue to unpack this issue that's like it's not going anywhere. You know, they just like incidents like this which spark up a conversation, but it's definitely not going anywhere. So we look forward to like continuing the relationship.
Yeah.
And
No, thank you for having me, because I think, you know, as you mentioned, the issues aren't going anywhere, and it's just sometimes there are events which become important in the moment, and 100%. You know, it brings everything to the surface. But I think we should really start having more conversations of this nature, not just for men. I think women also need their own spaces, and even mixed spaces, because it's not like we have men in their own country and women in their own. We're sharing space, and we need to learn to share those spaces.
And we need to learn to relate to each other and understand these things.
Because right now, it sometimes feels like we're talking past each other. You know, where men will be like, no, women are the problem. We can't be vulnerable around them. And women are like, men are the problem. We don't feel safe around you. And I think we're not really understanding each other in the issues that are happening, because I think there are a lot of social issues in the country. 100%. And we need to start creating more spaces, starting more conversations on how to address those issues.
100%. Couldn't agree more. But for this week, guys, that's all we have for you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to do the usual. Leave a comment, like the video, subscribe, share it with a friend. And until next week, see you. Cheers.